What happens when two of country music's biggest personalities collide on live television? When a single interview question sparks a firestorm nobody expected. Today, we're breaking down the explosive on-air clash between Keith Urban and Kelly Clarkson that had everyone buzzing. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below because this story goes off the rails fast. The Kelly Clarkson show was supposed to be a routine promotional stop for Keith Urban. He was there to talk about his newest album, share a few backstage stories, and connect with Kelly's huge daytime audience. But what began as an easygoing conversation quickly morphed into something far more heated when Kelly brought up a subject that clearly hit a sensitive spot. So, Keith, I need to ask you about something that's been stirring up conversation across the industry, Kelly began, leaning forward with her trademark friendly smile. There's been talk lately about authenticity in country music, and I'm curious how you feel about artists who some people say have drifted too far from the genre's roots. Keith's expression changed instantly. The relaxed vibe he'd kept up during the first part of the interview seemed to stiffen, and his fingers tapped once against the arm of his chair. Well, Kelly, that's a pretty loaded question, isn't it? What are you trying to imply here? I'm just wondering, Kelly continued, not noticing how tense things had become, how you respond to critics who say that certain artists, including you, may have leaned too much into pop. There was that article last month that mentioned your recent collaborations and questioned whether you're even making country music anymore, or if you've crossed over entirely. The audience, warm and cheerful only moments earlier, felt the shift immediately. Keith leaned back, and for a moment, the only noise in the studio was the faint hum of overhead lights. When he finally answered, his voice had a sharpness that hadn't been there before. You know what, Kelly? I find it interesting you'd bring up an article like that without asking me beforehand if I even wanted to touch on that topic. This feels a whole lot less like an interview and a lot more like an ambush. Kelly's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard. Keith, that's not what I meant at all. I'm just trying to have a real conversation about how country music has changed. You're one of the biggest names in the genre, and I figured you'd want to speak on some of the discussions happening right now. Address what exactly? Keith's voice rose, his Australian accent sharpening as frustration crept in. Address the idea that people think they can shove me into a box and dictate what music I'm allowed to make. Address the assumption that success somehow means you're no longer authentic. The tension was thick enough to slice through. Kelly shifted in her seat, clearly realizing things had taken an unexpected turn. Keith, that's not what I'm saying. I love your music. I've always been a fan. I just wanted your take on what people are talking about in the industry right now. My perspective? Keith let out a laugh, but there was nothing playful about it. Here's my perspective, Kelly. I've been making music for over 20 years. I've won Grammy Awards. I've sold millions of records. And through it all, I've remained true to myself as an artist. So when someone asks me on national television to defend my creative decisions because of what some critic wrote, yeah, I take issue with that. The studio fell completely silent. Kelly took a slow breath, trying to regain control. Keith, I really think this is a misunderstanding. I wasn't asking you to defend anything. I was just trying to open a discussion about how the genre has evolved, and I thought you'd have valuable insight. A discussion? Keith's voice sliced through the air. Let me ask you something, Kelly. When was the last time someone questioned your authenticity as a pop artist? When was the last time someone implied your success meant you weren't true to your roots? I'm guessing it doesn't happen very often, does it? Kelly opened her mouth, but Keith kept going. And you know what the real problem is? It's not about authenticity. It's about the fact that country music loves to police its own. We're expected to stay in our lane, sound a certain way, look a certain way, and God forbid we evolve even a little. Keith, I get that you're upset, Kelly said, her voice more defensive now, but you're reading something into this that wasn't there. I asked a valid question about what's happening in the genre, not about your personal worth as an artist. Did you, though? Keith shot back. because it feels a whole lot like you came in ready to make a point. And it's always the artists who try something new, who collaborate outside the box, who push boundaries, so those are the ones who get singled out. The audience remained frozen, watching two huge stars go head to head in real time. Kelly straightened up, matching his intensity. You know what, Keith? I think you're being unfair. I've had tons of country artists on this show, and I've never had a conversation escalate like this. Maybe the issue isn't the questioner, maybe it's how you're choosing to hear it. That comment hit Keith hard. His jaw tightened, he leaned forward. Oh, so now it's my fault. I'm the problem because I don't appreciate being blindsided with questions crafted to make me look like I've sold out. That's rich, Kelly. Really rich. Kelly's face reddened slightly as she tried to maintain her composure. Keith, this has gotten out of hand. Neither of us intended this to happen. Oh, I think you knew exactly what you were doing, Keith said, his voice getting louder. You had that article ready. You had your questions prepared. And you expected me to give some polished little answer about evolving genres and open-minded audiences. Well, sorry, but I'm not playing along. The crew looked visibly nervous as the interview continued spiraling. Kelly tried once more to steady things. Keith, I promise you I wasn't trying to ambush you. I've always tried to ask meaningful questions so artists can share their views. If I offended you, it wasn't intentional. Intent doesn't matter, Keith snapped. What matters is what actually happened. And what happened is that you sat me down in front of your cameras and asked me to justify my music because of what some critic thinks. Do you realize how insulting that is? Kelly's patience finally cracked. Her voice turned sharp. Keith, you're being extremely unfair and honestly, a little dramatic. I asked a straightforward question about industry trends. You're the one turning it into a personal attack. Maybe you need to look at why you're so sensitive about this topic. The words hung in the air like a spark in a room full of gasoline. Keith shot to his feet so fast his chair nearly toppled over. The audience gasped. Sensitive? You think I'm being sensitive? He snapped. I've been in this industry longer than you've been performing professionally, and I don't owe anyone an explanation for my music, least of all someone who's never walked a day in country music. Kelly remained seated, but her posture stiffened, eyes blazing. Excuse me? Someone who's never walked in country music? I may not be a country singer, but I know music, and I know authenticity. And right now, what I'm seeing is an artist so insecure about his own creative decisions that he can't even handle a basic question without blowing up. The studio went dead silent except for Keith's heavy breathing and the low hum of the equipment. What I'm going to do, Kelly, he said, his voice low but unwavering, is walk away from this train wreck of an interview before it gets any worse. I'm going to leave this studio with whatever dignity I still have. Because clearly staying here isn't doing either of us any favors. He took a step back from the interview area, breathing hard, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles in his face were visibly trembling. The audience didn't make a sound, no clapping, no murmuring, just stunned silence as they watched one of the most chaotic moments daytime television had ever seen. Kelly didn't move at first. She stood perfectly still, eyes locked on Keith. Her expression a mixture of anger, disbelief, and something far more personal, hurt. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't loud anymore, but the quiet firmness in it hit just as hard. You do whatever you feel you need to do, Keith. But don't pretend walking away makes you the bigger person here. Don't fool yourself into thinking that storming off a stage because you were asked a straightforward question somehow makes you dignified. Keith turned his head sharply, glaring at her. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you going to tell me what dignity looks like now too? Are you going to lecture me about maturity and professionalism after the way you blindsided me? Blindsided you? Kelly shot back, stepping forward again. Keith, the only thing that blindsided anyone here was your reaction. I asked you a question about something the entire industry is already talking about. You're acting like I dug up some private secret just to humiliate you. You practically did. he snapped. You brought up an article meant to undermine my credibility as an artist and expected me to sit here smiling through it. Maybe you're used to guests letting you poke and prod without pushing back. But that's not who I am. And maybe, Kelly replied, her voice tightening again, you're not the calm, collected artist you pretend to be. Maybe you're someone who's been stewing about those critics for a long time and today was just the day you couldn't hold it together anymore. Keith's eyes flashed, and for a split second, he looked like he might start yelling again, but instead he just shook his head slowly. You really don't get it, he said softly. But the softness was sharper than a shout. You think this is about critics? You think this is about an article number? This is about respect. And you showed me none. Kelly exhaled sharply. Respect goes both ways, Keith. You don't get to stand here and call me insecure, accuse me of manipulating my show for drama, and then act like you're the only one whose feelings matter. You're the host of a national show, Keith replied. Act like it. That line struck harder and Kelly's expression changed instantly. The hurt returned, but this time, it didn't vanish. It settled behind her eyes like something breaking quietly. She stepped toward him, not aggressively, but with a steadiness that made the room feel even smaller. You know, Keith, a broken bar, I invited you here because I respected you, because I thought you had something valuable to say about the direction country music is going, because I genuinely enjoy your work and thought this would be a meaningful conversation. But instead, you chose to believe the worst about me and my intentions. Keith didn't respond right away. He looked away for a moment, jaw tight, breathing uneven. When he spoke, his voice was almost flat. Maybe I expected better. Maybe I did too, Kelly said softly. There was no yelling now. No insults. Just two people who had pushed each other past their breaking points and were standing in the wreckage of what had started as a normal interview. Keith finally turned toward the exit, taking a slow breath before addressing her one last time. For what it's worth, he said, without looking back, I hope the drama was worth it. Kelly's voice came out barely above a whisper, but everyone heard it. It never is. Keith walked off the set, the camera crew instinctively pulling back to avoid capturing him too closely as he headed for the stage doors. The audience remained frozen, unsure whether to clap, gasp, or simply sit in disbelief. Kelly stayed in place for several seconds after he disappeared, staring at the empty space where he'd stood. Her shoulders finally dropped as though the weight of the entire encounter had just caught up with her. She blinked, swallowed, and forced herself to turn toward the camera. Something in her expression said everything: anger, hurt, confusion, and the painful realization that the moment would be talked about everywhere before the day was even over. Have left after being blindsided on national television. You're not being ambushed, Keith. You're being interviewed. There's a difference here even if you can't see it right now. Keith let out one last bitter laugh. You know what the saddest part of all this is, Kelly? I actually respected you as an interviewer. I thought you were someone who understood what it meant to be an artist trying to stay true to yourself. Those words struck the air like a final blow to whatever civility remained between them. Kelly's expression flickered to anger, giving way to something that looked painfully close to hurt. But when she spoke, her voice was cold enough to freeze the room. Well, Keith, I guess the feeling is mutual now, isn't it? Because the Keith Urban I expected to interview today wouldn't have turned a professional discussion into a personal attack. The Keith Urban I admired wouldn't accuse me of ambushing him just because I asked about his work. Keith shook his head slowly, something almost regretful in his eyes. You still don't get it, do you? You really think this was just about asking me about my music? You brought up specific criticism. You cited a specific article questioning my authenticity, and you did it in front of a live audience without warning me. That's not asking about my music. That's putting me on the witness stand. And you know what, Keith? Maybe you needed to be on the witness stand. Telly fired back. her composure finally cracking. Maybe someone finally needed to ask you the tough questions instead of letting you glide through interviews on charm and your accent. Maybe someone needed to challenge you instead of handing you easy questions so you can plug your latest album. The audience was silent, as some uncomfortable, others unable to look away from the wreck unfolding on stage. Keith stared at Kelly for several seconds, and when he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. There it is. The real Kelly Clarkson, and not the sweet host who claims she just wants honest conversations. The version who thinks successful artists need to be knocked down, the one who believes it's her duty to humble people who dare to succeed. That is not who I am, and you know it, Kelly shot back. But I do believe successful artists should be able to handle questions about their work without imploding. If you're putting music out into the world, you should be able to discuss it like an adult. Like an adult, Keith repeated, his voice rising again. Adults don't ambush each other with loaded questions on live TV. Adults don't drop negative articles on their guests without warning. Adults don't stir up drama at someone else's expense. Kelly straightened, meeting his intensity head-on. And adults don't throw tantrums because they're asked to consider different viewpoints about their own work. Adults don't accuse their hosts of setting them up just because they don't like how a conversation is going. Keith stepped back as if to leave, but then turned around again with renewed fire. You want to know what this is really about, Kelly? It's about you thinking you could use me to create some shocking moment for your show. You assumed the country music guy would make easy drama. That is absurd, and you know it, Kelly said sharply. I have never used a guest for drama, and I resent the accusation. What happened today is on you because you couldn't handle a simple question about industry criticism. Simple question? Keith laughed harshly. There was nothing simple about it. You came prepared with that article. You had follow-up questions ready, and I wouldn't be surprised if your producers were in your ear telling you to push harder the second I looked uncomfortable. Kelly's eyes flashed. Since you want to drag my team into this, let me make something clear. Every single person here was excited about having you on the show. Every one of them respects you as an artist. The only person who turned this into a disaster is standing right in front of me. Is that the story you're going to run with? Keith asked bitterly. That I'm just some unstable artist who couldn't handle a routine question? I'm going to tell people the truth, Kelly replied, voice steady. That I asked a valid question about your music, and you responded by attacking me personally. I'll tell them you turned this from a friendly conversation into a confrontation. Keith's anger softened for a moment, and something that looked almost like disappointment washed over him. You know what, Kelly? You're right about one thing. This conversation is over. Not because I can't take criticism. Not because I'm falling apart. It's over because I refuse to be part of whatever this was supposed to be. He started to walk away, but Kelly wasn't finished. You can leave if you want, Keith, but walking out won't solve anything. It won't make the criticism disappear, and it won't make you look any better than you do right now. Keith stopped, turned back, and met her eyes with cold, steady resolve. Look better, Kelly? I'm not trying to look better. I'm trying to hold on to some dignity in a situation where you've made that nearly impossible. I came here expecting a real conversation with someone I thought understood artists. Instead, I got interrogated by someone who seems to think my success makes me an easy target. For the last time, Keith, Kelly said firmly, you were not ambushed. You were interviewed. There's a difference here, even if your ego won't let you admit it. Keith shook his head one final time, and when he spoke, his voice blended anger with disappointment. My ego, Kelly? This was never about ego. This was about respect, about treating a guest with basic professionalism, and you failed on both counts. With those final words, Keith Urban turned and walked off the set, leaving Kelly standing alone in front of a stunned audience. The silence that followed felt endless, broken only by the echo of his footsteps heading toward the exit. Kelly stood frozen, chest rising and falling, trying to grasp what had just taken place. When she finally spoke, Her voice is soft but steadier, carried through the silent studio. Well, a broken bar, I guess. That wraps up today's interview with Keith Urban. We'll be right back after the break. But as the cameras powered down and the studio lights dimmed, one thing was clear. This wasn't just the end of an interview. It was the collapse of any remaining professional relationship between two artists who had just burned every bridge between them in front of millions. What did you think about her?